At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. On a planet where everything was either broken or trying to kill you, Jedediah Stone's most reliable solution for both problems answered to the name RIP. On this particular mid-cycle rotation on the planet Cinder, the machine was failing on at least two of those fronts. His own stubbornness held like a bedrock anchor, but the rust was whining a war of attrition, and he was too far wedged into the guts of a malfunctioning moisture vaporator to get a good angle for a kick. "Come on, you cantankerous bucket of bolts," he muttered, his voice a muffled growl inside the grimy casing. The air tasted of hot metal and burned lubricant. His fingers, slick with hydraulic fluid, fumbled for the hydrospanner he'd just dropped. It was, of course, resting mockingly just out of reach, a glint of steel in the mechanical gloom. "The internal release needs a trip, but the actuator's buried 3 feet deep in the primary condenser coil." He couldn't see it, he couldn't feel it, he could only curse it. He grunted, contorting his arm at an angle that would make a contortionist weep. The muscles in his shoulders screamed in protest. Nothing. He exhaled, a gust of warm, stale air in the tight space. With a final metallic scrape that set his teeth on edge, he wriggled backward, extricating himself from the machine's greasy maw. He stood, his joints popping, and wiped a smear of black grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. The motion left a much larger smear in its place, an unintentional mark of his station. He turned his head and spat a stream of dark tobacco juice into the red dust, where it sizzled for a moment before disappearing. Jed looked down at the vaporator, a monument to planned obsolescence, then over at the blue healer sitting patiently beside it. The dog had been watching a dust devil spin across the barren flats, its head cocked with the intense scrutiny of a seasoned meteorologist tracking a storm front. Now its intelligent brown eyes fixed on him, one ear pricked up, the other flopped over in a look of perpetual inquiry. Jed stuck 2 fingers in his mouth and let out a short, complex bird song of whistles. The tune was a trilling, intricate melody, a specific set of instructions encoded in chirps and warbles. RIP, whose official designation in the colony registry of Providence was Vermin Control Asset 7, immediately shifted from idle observation to active duty. He stood, gave a full-body shake that sent a small cloud of red dust into the air, and trotted to the vaporator. He circled it once, his nose twitching, analyzing the problem from every angle. He went directly to the opening where Jed was wedged. Without hesitation, he stuck his entire head and neck into the greasy darkness, guided by a sense that blended scent, sound, and an uncanny understanding of mechanics. A moment of metallic scrabbling followed, then a soft click as the release tripped. A maintenance panel on the side of the machine popped open with a sigh of pressurized air and a puff of dust. Rip trotted to the new opening, dove his head in, and emerged a second later with the heavy steel alloy hydrospanner clamped firmly in his jaws. He padded over to Jed's outstretched hand, dropped the tool neatly into his palm with a satisfying clank, and sat back on his haunches. He looked up, his tail thumping a silent, expectant rhythm on the packed earth. Jed looked from the tool to the dog, then back to the tool. He offered a single, slow nod of acknowledgement. "Good boy." Rip's tail gave 2 satisfied thumps against the ground. It was all the praise he required. Jed turned back to the vaporator, spanner in hand, ready to resume his one-man war against entropy. It was just another quiet, frustrating, and ultimately manageable day in Providence. The peace, such as it was, shattered like cheap glass. It began with an absence of light, a sudden, unnatural twilight that swallowed the landscape. A shadow, vast and cruciform, fell over the entire settlement, blotting out Cinder's weak sun and dropping the temperature by a noticeable few degrees. Every colonist, every child, every mechanic looked up from their work, their faces upturned in collective apprehension. Suspended in the sky, silent and colossal, was a Grale Ascendancy warship. Its hull was a patch of absolute nothingness in the sky, a darkness that seemed to drink the light. It wasn't just in their airspace. Its presence was an occupation. On a high bluff overlooking the colony's main square, an opulent tribunal materialized with unnerving speed. Gilded chairs and wavering fields of hard light assembled themselves around a towering figure clad in fused basalt armor. His four-jointed limbs moved with an arrogant languidness, each motion a display of contemptuous power. A holodrone, buzzing like an angry hornet, projected his massive, sneering image down into the settlement, a 50-foot ghost of imperial disdain. Before the alien could speak, a calm, clear voice cut across the colony-wide comms, hijacking the frequency. Arkanbelos, this is Mayor Kyla Marin of Providence. Your vessel is in violation of the Terran Expansionary Accords, Section 12, which prohibits military posturing over a non-belligerent civilian settlement. The giant hologram of Arkanbelos threw its head back and laughed. The sound was a booming, ugly avalanche of noise, full of jagged edges and dismissive cruelty that echoed off the prefab habdromes. Your pathetic human laws are the squeaking of mice beneath the heel of a god, little mayor. You have failed to pay the tribute demanded for your squatting on our sacred hunting grounds. An example must be made. He gestured with one of his three-fingered hands. From the belly of the warship, a heavy lift dropship detached and descended toward the base of the bluff. It deposited a massive shielded cage with a low thud that shook the ground. A hydraulic gate groaned open. Two Grale handlers in lesser armor jabbed at the cage's occupant with long, cackling electropods. A bellow of pure, unadulterated rage ripped through the air, carrying the sharp scent of crushed flint and superheated metal. A 10-ton behemoth stormed out of the cage. It was a nightmarish fusion of a rhino, a wild boar, and an armored personnel carrier. Thick, overlapping plates of biogenic ceramic, tough as a starship's hull, covered its body. Two forward-swept tusks, each the size of a small vehicle, scraped against the ground and threw sparks. This was a Drexel, a primed war beast, deliberately goaded and unleashed just inside the perimeter fence, which the dropship's point defense cannons had slagged on its descent. It charged into the main square. Its hooves, broad as dinner plates, cracked the permacrete. It roared again, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated deep in the colonists' bones. People screamed and scattered, a wave of panic breaking against the unyielding fury of the beast. Automated defense turrets on the rooftops swiveled to track it, but held their fire. Everyone knew what a stray plasma bolt could do in the middle of town. Then, through the cacophony of terror, a single dry sound cut through the noise. A laugh. It was quiet, yet it carried with an utter lack of fear. Colonists turned. The Grale on the bluff paused. The Drexel, in its rampage, seemed to hesitate for a split second. Leaning against the now-repaired moisture vaporator, wiping the last of the grease from his hands with a faded rag, was Jedediah Stone. He looked at the 10-ton monster currently trying to gore a cargo container, then up at the 50-foot hologram of Arkanbelos. He slowly shook his head with the weary disappointment of a man inspecting a poorly built fence. He spat another stream of tobacco juice. He then stuck two fingers in his mouth and let out a piercing, carrying whistle that sliced through the lingering screams and the beast's angry snorts. It was a sharp, commanding sound, a clear and unambiguous summons. Every eye in the square, human and Grale, snapped to Jed. The Drexel, momentarily distracted from its destructive tantrum by the sharp sound, turned its massive head, its small, hate-filled eyes trying to locate the source of the whistle. It didn't see Jed. It saw the blur of blue and gray fur that shot past him and streaked into the square. Rip hit the permacrete at a dead run, a 40-pound cannonball of muscle and focused intent. He didn't slow, he didn't hesitate. He barked once, a sharp, challenging sound that was absurdly small compared to the Drexel's roars, yet it seized the larger creature's full attention. The Drexel, enraged and utterly baffled by this tiny, noisy, and apparently suicidal new target, lowered its armored head. Its powerful legs bunched, and it charged. It was a locomotive of muscle and hate, a biological battering ram designed to shatter fortifications and break armies. The sound shook with each stride. Rip didn't meet the charge. He didn't dodge left or right. He flowed around it like water around a stone. As the colossal tusks sliced through the air where he had been a microsecond before, he executed a move born of 1,000 generations of instinct. A perfect, lightning-fast heel nip. His teeth, designed for gripping stubborn livestock, sank just deep enough into the thick, leathery hide of the Drexel's rear ankle to send a jolt of sharp, unexpected pain up its leg. The nip itself was trivial, a pinprick to the behemoth. The surprise of it, however, sent a cascading misfire through its nervous system. The massive beast stumbled, its perfectly coordinated charge broken by a single twitching muscle. It let out a bellow of frustrated rage and whirled around, jaws snapping with enough force to sever a steel girder. But Rip was already gone. He was on the other side, barking sharply, a taunting staccato sound that drew the Drexel's attention again. For the next minute, the colonists and the Grale tribunal were treated to a master class in applied physics and animal physiology. Rip put on a herding display that would have been legendary in any pasture on any world. He never attacked the beast head-on. He used its own overwhelming aggression and unstoppable momentum against it. When the Drexel charged, Rip would feint one way, then dart under its massive belly, nipping at the opposite back leg, causing it to overcorrect and spin clumsily. When it tried to gore him, he'd leap back, letting the tusks bury themselves in the side of a prefab building, then dash into a snap at its snout before it could pull free. He turned the Grale's terrifying avatar of destruction into a clumsy, lumbering oaf, a 10-ton ballerina spinning in circles, trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer. The Drexel's roars of fury slowly morphed into grunts of exertion, then into heaving pants. Finally, utterly exhausted and thoroughly confused, the great beast backed itself into the corner formed by the general store and the medbay. It lowered its head, panting heavily, its wide, bloodshot eyes locked on the tiny blue and gray creature that refused to fight, refused to flee, and refused to let it rest. It stood there, trembling with a mixture of rage and adrenaline, but it wouldn't move. It was cornered. It was contained. It was beaten. Jed watched the whole spectacle with a calm, appraising eye. He walked calmly into the square, stopping a respectful 20 feet from the now stationary monster. He spat another stream of tobacco juice into the dust. The sizzling sound was unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. He looked up at the slack-jawed 50-foot hologram of Archon Bellows. "Guess it just needed a firm hand," Jed said, his voice a dry rasp. "Or paw." The Grale were silent. Their multi-jointed jaws, usually set in lines of imperious disdain, hung agape in stunned, uncomprehending disbelief. They had just watched their living god of war, their divine instrument of holy fury, get thoroughly and completely humiliated by a creature smaller than its own head. The stillness that descended from the bluff was thick with shattered pride. Archon Bellows' holographic face cycled through a spectrum of emotions no human had ever seen on a Grale before: shock, confusion, and finally, a deep, incandescent rage that seemed to make the projection itself flicker. His honor guard, a dozen warriors in polished basalt armor, raised their plasma lances. The weapons hummed to life with lethal intent. Before Bellows could give the order that would have vaporized the town square, Kyla Marin's image projected beside his, smaller but no less resolute. "Archon Bellows," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as broken glass. "I invoke Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Grale Hegemony Frontier Pacification Mandate." A low murmur, audible even from the ground, ran through Bellows's council. Their antennae twitched in agitation. They knew their own laws. "The mandate clearly states," Kyla continued, pressing her sudden unexpected advantage, "that should a lesser species demonstrate unforeseen adaptive capabilities in the face of a divine instrument, your term for the Drexal, I believe, a trial by ordeal must be offered before summary judgment can be enacted." Bellows was visibly trapped. His own sacred, ancient code, the very foundation of his authority, was being used against him by a soft-skinned primitive. To ignore it now, in front of his subordinates and the entire human colony, would be a display of weakness more profound than the one his war beast had just suffered. His fury didn't vanish, it simply changed shape, twisting his features into a cruel, knowing smile. "Very well, diplomat," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "A trial you shall have." His gaze, a burning pinpoint of hatred, shifted from Kyla's hologram to the man standing calmly in the square below. "We Grale do not tame the divine instruments. We are their humble guides. This vermin," he spat the word, "pretends he can break its will? He thinks he can chain a god to a plow?" Bellows' voice rose to a thundering crescendo. "Let us see how his blasphemy fares against the untamed wild. Let the man go forth with his pest. Let us see if his tricks can master the sacred herds, or if the wild will devour him and his pathetic ambitions." He issued the ultimatum, each word a hammer blow. "Succeed," Bellows boomed, "and your disgusting little colony will be tolerated as a curious anomaly. Fail, and you will be the first to be eaten when we burn this settlement to the ground." Kyla's face went pale. The legal loophole she wielded so expertly had become a death sentence. She had saved the colony from immediate destruction, only to condemn its most capable and most infuriatingly stubborn citizen to an impossible task. She looked down at Jed, her expression a mixture of horror and apology. Jed just shrugged, seemingly unbothered by the pronouncement of his likely demise. He gave Rip's head a scratch behind the ears. "Sounds like a job," he said to no one in particular. The pest control was a vehicle in the loosest sense of the word. It was a collection of parts flying in loose formation. A beaten-up, open-topped ground skimmer Jed had cobbled together from a salvage atmospheric shuttle engine, the chassis of a pre-colony ore hauler, and enough welded plates to stop small arms fire, probably. It skimmed a few feet above the red rock of the canyons, kicking up a plume of dust as Jed guided it with a pair of heavy control yokes. Rip stood on the passenger seat, nose in the wind, ears flapping, a picture of canine bliss. Jed wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for stock. He brought the skimmer to a halt on a high ridge overlooking a wide, dusty basin where a small herd of about 20 Drexal were grazing on the tough, scrub-like vegetation. He raised a pair of heavy electro-binoculars to his eyes, the servos whining softly as he focused. He muttered to himself, a running commentary that only Rip could hear. "Look at that big bull over there. Mean eye. Tusks are chipped, see? Fights too much. All muscle, no sense. Too much trouble." He scanned the herd. "Females are too protective of the calves. Too flighty. Don't want flighty." His gaze settled on a younger bull on the edge of the herd. It was big, but not fully grown, its biogenic plates still showing the faintest signs of youthful flexibility. "Now him," Jed grunted. "Good conformation. Wide stance. Not too aggressive, not too skittish. He'll do. He landed the pest control behind the ridge. From a stock locker, he pulled a massive spool of what looked like thin black wire. It was spun diamond filament line, a composite rated to tow a small starship. He anchored one end to a massive immovable rock outcropping that jutted from the canyon wall like a stone fang. Then he unspooled the line, laying it across a narrow pass that served as one of the few exits from the basin. His hands moved with an unhurried confidence, each knot tied, each placement considered. He returned to the skimmer and gave Rip a nod. "All right, partner, go earn your dinner. Just the young fella, bring him home." Rip leaped from the skimmer and shot down the slope into the basin. He had his target. He charged the younger bull, barking and harassing it, weaving it in and out of its clumsy attempts to stop him. The young bull, more hot-tempered than the herd leader, became enraged by this tiny, persistent pest. It forgot the herd, forgot grazing, forgot everything but the burning need to crush this infuriating little creature. It thundered after Rip, who was now leading it on a merry chase, directly towards the narrow pass. The rest of the herd watched, confused, but didn't follow. Rip sprinted through the pass and scrambled up the far wall, well clear of the trap. The bull, blinded by fury, charged straight through. It hit the diamond filament line at 40 miles per hour. The line sang with tension, a sound like the grinding of tectonic plates that vibrated through the rock itself. It didn't snap, it held. The bull's powerful front legs were swept from under it. With a bellow of shock and pain, the 10-ton beast crashed to the ground in a chaotic heap of limbs and dust. Before it could even begin to process what had happened, Jed was in the pest control, hovering directly over the other end of the line. He activated the skimmer's powerful cargo winch, hooking it to the loose end. The winch whirred, not to lift the beast, but to tighten the line with incredible force. The filament bit deep into the rock outcropping on one side and cinched the Drexel's leg hard against the canyon wall on the other, pinning it helplessly. The Drexel thrashed and roared, but it was caught. It was infuriated, terrified, but physically grounded and, most importantly, intact. Jed spat a stream of tobacco juice over the side of the skimmer. "One down," he said to Rip, who watched from his perch on the canyon wall. "Now for the hard part." The next several weeks were a grueling blur of dust, sweat, and a symphony of bruises. Jed learned quickly that Drexels were less like cattle and more like small, ornery mountains with a bad attitude. His first attempt at a corral, made from the welded-together hull plating of a wrecked freighter, lasted approximately 7 minutes. The first Drexel he and Rip managed to herd inside took one look at its confinement, let out a bellow that rattled Jed's teeth, and walked through the wall as if it were made of cardboard. It took them 2 days of tracking across the blasted plains to recapture the panicked beast, a process that involved Rip performing a series of daring herding maneuvers and Jed using the pest control to strategically create small rock slides to steer it. He adapted. He sent up scavenged survey drones, watching the herds for hours, logging their behaviors, their social structures, their migratory patterns. He wasn't just looking for animals to capture, he was selecting for temperament. He built a new corral in a natural box cannon, reinforcing the entrance with a gate made from solid bridge girders he'd salvaged from a pre-colony ruin. Rip would spend days getting a herd accustomed to his presence, a tiny, non-threatening shadow on the edge of their awareness. He'd slowly move them over kilometers of terrain until they walked into the canyon of their own accord, thinking it was their own idea. The breaking process was a contest of wills, fought on a colossal scale. Jed carried a massive two-handed shock lance, a 10-foot carbon fiber pole connected by a humming cable to a fusion pack on his back that looked dangerously unstable. He didn't use it to punish, he used it to establish boundaries, a language of cause and effect the beasts could understand. A charge at the wrong time earned a powerful, non-lethal jolt that sent Drexel stumbling back. An attempt to gore another beast in the herd earned a similar correction. He learned their body language, the subtle shift in weight before a charge, the flick of an ear that signaled aggression, the low rumble that meant contentment. He got it wrong once with a particularly ornery female. She feinted left, a classic bluff he should have seen coming, then hooked a tusk right. The blow caught him square in the chest, cracking his reinforced vest and sending him flying 20 feet into the canyon wall. He got up with 2 cracked ribs and a mouthful of blood, spat, and limped right back to the gate, shock lance in hand. That was the day he earned her respect. That was the day he named her Daisy. All the while, Rip was the enforcer, a blue and gray streak reinforcing Jed's will. He'd break up fights between the younger bulls with a fury of nips and barks, move the herd from one side of the canyon to the other for feeding, and slowly, painstakingly, replace their wild instincts with the rules of a new herd, Jed's herd. It wasn't about domination, it was about teaching them a new language, where the tiny, 2-legged creature and his even tinier 4-legged partner were inexplicably in charge. The day Jed brought the first 3 broken Drexel back to Providence, the entire colony stopped to watch. He just walked them down the main street, the massive beasts moving with a slow, deliberate gait. They weren't chained, they weren't caged, they were just following him. Rip trotted proudly alongside, head held high, looking for all the world like a general reviewing his troops. Jed marched them straight to the colony's main workshop, a cavernous structure run by Sully, a man whose coveralls were more grease than fabric. Sully came out, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes wide as saucers. "Got a job for you, Sully," Jed said, his voice flat. He pointed to the lead bull, a creature named Grunt because of the noise it made whenever Jed got too close. "I need you to fit that one with a modified cargo lifter frame, something it can pull." Sully stared at the Drexel, which stared back with a placid, cow-like expression. Then he looked at Jed. "You want me to bolt a field plow to a living demolition charge?" A slow, mad grin spread across his face. "Yeah, I can do that. Give me an hour." An hour later, the sight of Grunt, fitted with a heavy-duty steel harness, carving a deep, perfect furrow into the hard-packed earth outside the hydroponics bay, brought the colony to a standstill. This was the monster that was supposed to be their executioner. This was a living god of war, and it was plowing a field. Soon, Daisy was hauling tons of ore from the derelict strip mine that had been abandoned for years. The colony's fusion generator hit 100% output for the first time in its history. Lights came on in sections of the settlement that had been dark since landing day. For the first time, children in Providence were eating fresh fruit grown on-world. The future, which had always seemed a distant, abstract concept, was starting to look like a home. Sully, watching from his workshop, was sketching furiously on a data pad. He held it up for Jed to see. It was a rough but ingenious design for a command saddle, complete with a reinforced seat, control reins fabricated from the same diamond filament line, and a cup holder welded neatly to the side. "Just thinking ahead, Jed," Sully said, his eyes gleaming with creative fervor. "If you can make 'em pull, I bet I can rig something so we can make 'em steer." Aboard his warship, Archon Bellows watched the reports from his spy drones. His fury mounted with every image. He saw his divine instruments being used as tractors. He saw the human colony thriving, green shoots rising from the red dust. It was an intolerable insult. It was blasphemy made manifest. "They mock us," he hissed to his second-in-command, a grizzled grackle who had seen 100 campaigns. "They take our gods and turn them into beasts of burden." He slammed his fist on a console, cracking the screen. "Launch the Unbroken." His subordinate flinched. "My lord, the Unbroken project is extreme. It has not been fully tested." "This is no longer a civilian target," Bellows roared.
It is a festering wound of heresy. The Unbroken was created for one purpose, to erase that which cannot be broken by lesser means. Launch it now!
The Unbroken was Belos's personal project, a champion Drexel, 50% larger than a normal bull. Its biogenic plates reinforced with woven metallic fibers that gave it a dark, menacing sheen. Its tusks were laced with a biometallic alloy that glowed with a faint internal energy. It was a living meteor, a targeted extinction event. The pod screamed through the atmosphere and impacted just outside the colony's perimeter fence with the force of a small earthquake. The pod cracked open, and the Unbroken emerged. It smashed through the perimeter fence like it was made of paper. The colonists, now with something real to lose, panicked. Alarms blared. "All non-essential personnel to the new shelters, now!" Kyla Martin's voice was strained but steady over the comms. But Jed remained calm. He stood in a predetermined spot, watching the monster's inexorable approach. He knelt down, gave Rip a good long scratch behind the ears, and pointed a steady finger at the approaching behemoth. "Go get him, boy," he said softly. Rip shot off like a rocket, but this beast was different. The Unbroken, guided by its augmented intelligence, initially ignored the small barking creature. It had a primary objective: destroy the colony's central generator. It calculated the most direct path and began its charge, dismissing the dog as an irrelevant variable. Rip, realizing he was being ignored, changed tactics. He didn't nip at its heels. He shot forward, a suicidal dash straight for the monster's head. He leaped, snapping his jaws just an inch from its sensitive snout. It was a profound insult, a challenge so direct and audacious that it triggered a cascade failure in the Unbroken's programming. Primal rage overrode tactical procedure. Enraged, the monster forgot its mission. Its entire being focused on obliterating the tiny creature that had dared to challenge it. It thundered after Rip, who was now leading it on a frantic chase towards the canyons. Twice, the Unbroken's augmented senses warned it of the trap, and it tried to veer away from the narrow pass. Each time, Rip had to perform another daring, close-range maneuver to pull its attention back, keeping its rage focused solely on him. He led it straight into the kill box. On a rocky ridge high above, Mags, the colony's demolitions expert, watched on her monitor. "That's a big boy. He's gonna need more than a buffing. Triggering avalanche procedure. Fire in the hole!" She slammed her palm down on a large red detonator. A series of shaped charges went off, triggering a massive rock slide that sealed the canyon entrance. A second set sealed the other end. The Unbroken was trapped. It roared, but its rage was impotent. After an hour, it slumped to the ground, whimpering, defeated not by a bigger weapon, but by a 40-pound dog's sheer audacity. For Archon Belos, this was the final, unforgivable, soul-shattering heresy. His champion, his masterpiece, defeated by a trick. Trapped by dirt and rocks. Humiliated by a pest. He stood before the main view screen of his warship, his four-jointed frame rigid. He turned to face his command staff, his eyes burning with the cold fire of a zealot. He addressed his entire fleet, his voice amplified and broadcast to every ship in the flotilla, thundering with the weight of righteous fury. "The human stain has committed the ultimate blasphemy," he roared. "They bound our God with earth and shackled it with fear. They are a disease, a corruption that must be purged with holy fire." His voice dropped to a deadly, chilling promise. "This cannot stand. Their blasphemy will be answered with extinction. Unleash the herds, all of them. We will not guide their fury. We will let it wash over this world and cleanse it of this human filth." The order was given. On the plains and in the canyons, Grackle dropships disgorged hundreds upon hundreds of war Drexel. Handlers of armored skiffs flew among them, goading them with sonic horns and energy whips, pointing the entire living tide in one direction. The ground itself began to tremble. A red cloud of dust rose on the horizon, the harbinger of an army of monsters. An army marching on Providence. The ground shook so violently the tools rattled off shelves in Sully's workshop. The colonists gathered in the main square, armed with plasma rifles and grim expressions. They had something to fight for now, something more than mere survival. They had a home. Jed stood before them, resolute. Flanked by his own small herd of tamed Drexel, he was the picture of calm in the face of the apocalypse. "They think these things are gods," he said, his voice carrying over the rumble. He jerked a thumb toward his own placid mounts. "We're about to teach them they're just cattle with an attitude problem." He looked to Sully. "Are those rigs ready?" Sully grinned and slapped the contraption on Grunt's back.
"Been ready since yesterday, Jed. Just needed the riders."
The tame Drexel were now fitted with the command saddles Sully had designed. They were mounts. Kyla Marin stood beside Jed, a plasma rifle held expertly in her hands. "Every able-bodied colonist to their post," she commanded. "You know the plan. Hold the line." Colonists began to mount up. Farmers, mechanics, even the colony's head botanist, a man who had never held a weapon before, clambered into saddles with looks of absurd purpose. Jed swung himself up onto Grunt's broad back. Rip, with a running start, leaped effortlessly up after him, settling into the small side seat Sully had welded on. Jed took the heavy reins in his hands. He looked towards the roiling dust cloud on the horizon. "Let's ride," he said. The battle was pure, beautiful, unhinged chaos. The Grackle army, a thundering wave of tusks and biogenic plate, crested the last ridge, expecting to smash into a terrified line of infantry. Instead, they were met by their own kind. A dozen Drexel, ridden by shouting, gun-toting humans, charged out to meet them. It was a sight so fundamentally wrong, so deeply blasphemous to the Grackle psyche, that their initial charge faltered for a precious second. That second was all the humans needed. It was a brutal, messy, rolling brawl. The human-ridden Drexel, guided by their riders, fought with the purpose of trained cavalry mounts. They charged into the flanks of the Grackle herd, breaking its cohesion. Colonists fired their plasma rifles from their moving platforms, picking off the Grackle handlers on their hovering skiffs. The sheer numbers of the wild herd were overwhelming, but the human line held, just barely. Jed, riding at the center of the formation, saw the critical moment approaching. He raised 2 fingers to his lips and let out a sharp, piercing whistle, a specific series of notes. "Go!" At the command, Rip launched himself from the side seat, a blur of fur hitting the ground at a full run. He became a lightning bolt on the battlefield. He cut hard to the left, weaving through a maelstrom of stomping hooves and slashing tusks. He reached the flank of the main Grackle herd. He targeted their lead bulls, the ones setting the pace. He moved like a surgeon, his signature heel nips delivered with pinpoint focus. The lead bulls, confused and irritated, began to break formation. Their confusion spread like a virus. A third of the Grackle charge, now leaderless, broke off from the main assault, veering hard into a side canyon. Killbox 2. From her hidden perch, Mags watched her monitors, a feral grin on her face. "Come to Mama," she whispered, and slammed the detonator. Another massive rock slide thundered down, sealing the canyon and trapping a huge chunk of the Grackle army. The tide of the battle began to turn on the back of a single, fearless 40-pound dog. From his command skiff, Archon Bellows watched in apoplectic fury. His perfect wave of divine rage had been broken by heretical tactics and a pet. His pride was being ground into dust.
"No more tricks," he roared. "No more vermin. I will crush this blasphemy myself."
He urged his personal mount forward, a sleek, black-hided Drexel. Bellows leaped from his skiff onto its back. He spotted Jed on his larger, dust-covered mount. Bellows laughed, a wild, unhinged sound.
"Face me, primitive! Face the wrath of a true god-wielder!"
He charged. His black Drexel was a spear point of fury. Jed held his ground, his hand resting on the coil of the diamond filament lariat at his side. At the last possible second, a sharp, commanding whistle cut through the air. Rip, who had been weaving his way back toward Jed, shot out from the chaos. He didn't go for the back leg. He went for the front. He sank his teeth into the beast's front ankle in a perfect charge-breaking heel nip. Bellows' sleek Drexel flinched. Its stride broke for a fraction of a second. That's all Jed needed. His arm was a blur. The carbon nanotube lariat uncoiled, the loop whistling through the air. The throw whipped cleanly around the charging Drexel's front legs. Jed's mount, Grunt, dug its powerful legs into the dirt. The diamond filament line went taut with a sound like a giant guitar string snapping. The warlord's god was tripped mid-charge. It went down hard. Bellows was thrown clear, tumbling through the air and landing in the red dust. He scrambled to his knees, stunned, and stared in horror. His prize beast lay on its side, utterly humiliated, refusing to get up. A heavy shadow fell over him. Jed had dismounted. Grunt stomped a heavy, deliberate foot down on the plasma lance Bellows had dropped, pinning it to the ground. Jed leveled his own plasma rifle, its charging coils glowing softly. He looked down at the sputtering, dust-covered alien lord. "Time to put you out to pasture, Chief." With Archon Bellows captured, the Grale army broke. The remaining handlers, seeing their leader fall in such a profoundly embarrassing way, lost all cohesion. The wild Drexel, no longer driven by a unified purpose, scattered into the canyons. The battle was over. But the war was just beginning, for them. Days later, the main screen in the Providence Common Hall flickered with intercepted galactic news reports. The footage was grainy, but the content was clear. Grale battle cruisers were firing on each other in a distant star system. Bellows' capture and humiliation had been the catalyst. His rivals declared him unfit to lead, a blasphemer who had allowed their sacred divine instruments to be debased by vermin and their tricks. The Bellows heresy, as it came to be known, fractured the ascendancy. The Grale hegemony, an empire that had stood for 1,000 years on the foundation of predatory strength, was devouring itself in a brutal civil war. They were too busy tearing each other apart to bother with a backwater colony on a forgotten world. For the humans of Providence, it was a total victory. 6 months later, the colony of Providence was booming. The red dust of the settlement was crisscrossed with new roads, new buildings, and lush green fields. The constant low rumble of Drexel was now the sound of progress, not terror. The massive beasts pulled plows, hauled cargo containers, and served as mounts for the official colony defense force. A whole new industry of Drexel ranching had begun. Providence wasn't just surviving, it was prospering. Jed sat on the porch of his newly built cabin, quietly cleaning his rifle. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Rip was asleep at his feet, his paws occasionally twitching as he dreamed of herding nightmares through celestial fields. Jed looked out over a sprawling pasture. A dozen formerly terrifying beasts grazed peacefully. Watching over them was not Jed, but a young colonist, one of the first generation born on this world. And trotting at her heels was a small, energetic blue heeler pup with one ear that flopped over, one of Rip's. The pup darted in, playfully nipping at the heel of a young Drexel calf that had strayed too far, expertly turning it back towards its mother. Jed watched the scene, a rare, small smile touching his lips. He reached down and gave Rip's head a soft, affectionate pat. The old dog stirred, looked up at him, and rested his head back on Jed's boots with a contented sigh. Jed chuckled, a low, rasping sound. "Funny thing about apex predators," he said, to his dog and to the universe at large. "They're just cattle once you know where to nip." The porch boards creaked behind him. He didn't turn, just watched as the lights of the expanding settlement began to flicker on in the valley below, a new constellation, defying the encroaching twilight. "I used to think our greatest strength was the law," a voice said. It was Mayor Marin, holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. She handed one to Jed, her expression no longer that of a stressed diplomat, but of a confident leader. "I quoted Section 7 of their own mandate at them, thinking my cleverness with their rules would save us. Feels like a lifetime ago." "Rules are for people who agree on what the universe is supposed to look like," Jed grunted, taking a sip. "They thought it was a hunting ground, and we decided it was a ranch." Sully lumbered up the steps, wiping grease from his hands on a rag that had long since given up the fight.
"Speaking of which, Kyla, the new geothermal drill rig is ready. Daisy's grand calf is strong enough to haul it out to the western ridge tomorrow. We should be on independent power grid-wide by the end of the month."
He grinned, a flash of white in a grimy face.
"Never thought I'd say this, but thank the stars for 10-ton tractors with a bad attitude."
Kyla laughed, a real unburdened sound that carried in the crisp evening air. She looked from Jed's quiet confidence to Sully's boundless ingenuity, then down at the town below. The old perimeter fence, once a pathetic line against a hostile universe, was gone. In its place were wide, illuminated boulevards, fields glowing green under hydroponic lamps, and the deep, rumbling snores of domesticated monsters sleeping soundly in their paddocks. They had faced extinction and had turned it into an industrial revolution. Jed watched the young pup herd the calf, a perfect mirror of the partnership at his feet. He reached down, and Rip, without opening his eyes, thumped his tail twice against the worn wood. It was all the acknowledgement they ever needed. The Grale had sent their god of war, a creature of pure destructive force, to shatter a fledgling human colony. They saw an instrument of terror, a biological sledgehammer to crush the weak. That was their mistake. They had forgotten, or perhaps never known, the one fundamental truth about humanity. In a universe full of claws, fangs, and armor plating, humanity's greatest weapon had never been its own strength. It was its unparalleled, indomitable, and utterly insane ability to look at the most terrifying monster on the horizon, laugh, and see not a god to be feared, but a partner to be earned. And as the twin moons of Cinder rose over the mountains, the lights of Providence didn't just hold back the darkness. They blazed, a testament written in light and life across the face of a conquered world, that a human with a good dog is an apex predator all their own.